A woman's scream tears through the sterile silence of a hospital room. This isn't just any birth. It's a high-risk delivery of triplets she fought for years to conceive. Her name is Elara Vance, and she is utterly alone. Miles away, the man who promised to love her in sickness and in health, Millionaire CEO Damien Vance, is slipping a diamond ring onto the finger of another woman. He's abandoning his wife and unborn children at their most vulnerable moment for a life of power and passion with his mistress. But what Damien doesn't know is that a secret from his wife's past is about to walk through the doors of his lavish wedding and shatter his world in a way he never could have imagined. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of a reckoning that will shake an empire to its core. The pain was a white-hot supernova exploding behind Elara Vance's eyes and contracting into a crushing vice around her abdomen. It wasn't a wave anymore. It was a relentless, roaring ocean, and she was drowning in it. The rhythmic beep of the fetal heart monitors was the only percussion to her guttural screams, a frantic triple-time beat that sounded more like a countdown to catastrophe than a promise of life. Breathe with me, Elara. Come on. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The nurse's voice was a calm, distant shore Elara couldn't reach. Dr. Chen's face, usually a mask of professional composure, was etched with concern. Her blood pressure is spiking again. We need to keep her calm. Where is her husband? The question hung in the air, more painful than any contraction. Where is Damien? Just 6 hours ago, she had been at home packing the final items into the hospital bag. Her enormous belly, a testament to the 3 tiny lives nestled within, made every movement a monumental effort. They were their miracle babies, the result of 5 grueling years of IVF, countless injections, devastating disappointments, and finally one tearful, triumphant ultrasound. Damien had held her, his hand splayed across her stomach, and whispered, "Everything we've ever wanted, Ellie. Our legacy." His phone had buzzed on the counter. A text message. He'd glanced at it, his face tightening for just a fraction of a second, before smoothing back into a placid smile. "It's just Abernathy, the lawyer. A final detail on the Rossi merger. I have to go sign the papers. It's a formality. I'll be back in 2 hours tops. You just rest." He'd kissed her forehead, his lips cool and brief, and walked out the door of their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. An hour later, the first contraction had seized her sharp and unforgiving. She'd called him. It went straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into her veins. She texted, "It's happening. The babies are coming. Call me." No reply. Then a new message popped up on her screen. It wasn't from Damien. It was from a number she didn't recognize, a group chat she'd been accidentally added to. The message read, "Florist confirms all white orchid arrangements have been delivered to the St. Regis Ballroom. See you at the altar. Isabella." The world tilted. St. Regis, Isabella Rossi, the impossibly chic, raven-haired daughter of Marco Rossi, the head of the rival tech giant Damien's company was supposedly merging with. Elara had met her once at a charity gala. She'd watched Isabella laugh, a throaty, confident sound, as she'd placed a perfectly manicured hand on Damien's arm. Damien had laughed it off. "She's a shark, Ellie. You have to play the game." Her fingers trembling had typed a frantic search into her web browser, Damien Vance, Isabella Rossi wedding. The result hit her like a physical blow. A society blog posted that very morning, billion-dollar merger sealed with a kiss tech mogul, Damien Vance, to wed heiress Isabella Rossi in a surprise ceremony today at the St. Regis. The screen blurred. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the marble floor. A lie of such monumental, soul-crushing cruelty. This wasn't a business merger. It was a life merger. He wasn't signing papers. He was signing a marriage certificate. While she was here, her body tearing itself apart to bring his children, their children, into the world, he was celebrating a new life with another woman. The betrayal was a physical entity coiling in her gut, more agonizing than the labor itself. The pain in her body was for her children. The pain in her soul was from their father. "Elara, we need you to focus," Derchen's voice cut through the fog. "Baby C's heart rate is decelerating with the contractions. We might need to move to an emergency C-section." Panic clawed at her throat. No, I can do this," she gasped, the words ripped from her. She had to be strong. For them. Liam, Noah, and Amelia. The names they had chosen together on a rainy Sunday, tracing them on her belly. Had he been thinking of Isabella even then? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image of Damien in a tuxedo, smiling at his new bride. Alone, tethered to machines, and drowning in agony. Elara Vance did the only thing she could. She reached for her personal phone, ignoring the calls from her mother-in-law that she knew were just for show. Her fingers fumbled slick with sweat as she found the one number she hadn't called in 5 years. The one person she had pushed away because Damien had insisted he wasn't good enough for their new life. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. A deep, authoritative voice answered. "Sarah." "What is it? Is your sister okay?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "It's me," Elara choked out, her voice a raw whisper between gasps of pain. "Sarah gave me the phone. I need you. Please. He's marrying her. Right now. And the babies. They're coming." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then the voice came back stripped of all warmth and forged into something cold, hard, and dangerous. "Where is he, Elara? Give me the address." The St. Regis ballroom was a symphony in white and gold. Cascading arches of white orchids flown in from Hawaii that morning perfumed the air with a cloying sweetness. A string quartet played Vivaldi, the elegant notes weaving through the soft murmur of New York's high society. Everything was perfect. Everything was a statement of power. Damien Vance stood at the altar, a vision of bespoke Tom Ford perfection. He adjusted his cufflinks, the custom-made gold ones bearing the new, merged logo of Vance Rossi Industries. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple and dabbed it away with a silk handkerchief. He told himself it was the heat from the television lights. The press had been invited to capture the end of the ceremony, the ultimate PR move. The merger wasn't just a deal, it was a dynasty. He glanced at the front row. Marco Rossi, his new father-in-law, gave him a curt, approving nod. Marco was a piranha in a Savile Row suit, and this marriage was the final clause in a ruthless contract. With this union, their combined companies would crush all competition. It was a move that would cement Damien's legacy, elevating him from a mere millionaire CEO to a titan of industry. A legend. He had rationalized it all. Elara, she had become fragile. The pregnancy had consumed her. She was emotional, swollen, needy. She was a relic of his past, a past he was aggressively shedding. This was evolution, survival of the fittest. Isabella was his future. She was sleek, ambitious, and understood that love was a transaction and marriage was the ultimate leveraged buyout. The music swelled. The great doors at the back of the ballroom opened. And there she was, Isabella Rossi. She was breathtaking, a viper in couture. Her gown a slinky, backless creation by Jay. Mendel clung to her like a second skin. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate chignon, and a diamond necklace, a wedding gift from Damien purchased with funds from a joint account he shared with Alara, sparkled at her throat. Her smile was a triumphant slash of red lipstick. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were fixed on Damien, and in them he saw not adoration, but the cool, calculating appraisal of a business partner who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Damien's mind for a fleeting, traitorous moment flashed to Alara. He pictured her in the hospital, her face pale, her body racked with pain. He saw the ultrasound pictures of the 3 tiny heartbeats taped to their fridge. He felt a pang not of guilt, but of annoyance. It was an inconvenient, messy detail in an otherwise flawless plan. He had sent his lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, to the hospital with a prepared statement and a team of legal representatives. Abernathy would handle the divorce. He would offer Ilara a generous settlement, a golden cage for her and the children far from his new life. She would be taken care of. It was clean. It was business. Isabella reached the altar and placed her cool hand in his. The officiant, a man whose fee could have paid for a year of college, began to speak in sonorous, meaningless tones. We are gathered here today to witness the union of 2 powerful souls, Damien Vance and Isabella Rossi. Damien tuned it out, focusing on the future, the stock options, the headlines, the power. He was a king, and Isabella was his queen. Meanwhile, in a black Lincoln Navigator speeding through Manhattan traffic, a different kind of power was at play. The man in the back seat didn't speak. He stared out the window at the blur of the city, his face a granite mask. His name was Marcus Thorne, and for the last 5 years, he had been a ghost in his daughter's life. When Alara had brought Damien home, Marcus, a man who had spent 30 years on the bench as a federal judge, had seen him for exactly what he was, a charlatan with a charming smile and an empty soul. He'd seen the avarice in Damien's eyes, the way he looked at Alara, not with love, but with a sense of acquisition. Marcus had voiced his concerns calmly, rationally. "He doesn't love you, Ellie," he had said, his heart breaking. "He loves what you represent, old money, respectability, a door into a world he wants to conquer." Alara, blinded by love, and Damien's carefully constructed facade had accused him of being a snob, of trying to control her life. The fight had been brutal, ending with Alara screaming, "I choose him," and storming out. They hadn't spoken since, save for a few stilted holiday cards. The estrangement was a wound in Marcus's soul that had never healed. He had kept tabs on her, of course, through her sister Sarah. He knew about the struggles with IVF, the joy of the triplet pregnancy. And he had used his own resources, his network of old friends in the FBI and the SEC, to keep a quiet file on Damien Vance. He'd suspected Damien was cutting corners, but he never imagined a betrayal this depraved. His phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "She's at Lenox Hill Hospital. They're prepping her for a C-section. One of the babies is in distress. Please, Uncle Marcus, destroy him." The judge's knuckles turned white as he gripped his phone. "Destroy him." That was too simple. Destruction was quick. Damian Vance deserved something slower, a meticulous public and legally airtight dismantling of his entire existence. The Lincoln screeched to a halt in front of the St. Regis. A doorman rushed forward, his face a mask of polite inquiry. Judge Marcus Thorne stepped out of the vehicle. He was not a physically imposing man, but he moved with an aura of unshakable authority that made people instinctively take a step back. He wasn't armed with a weapon. He was armed with the law, and he was about to wield it like a sledgehammer. He strode past the doorman through the opulent lobby and towards the sound of Vivaldi. The two security guards at the ballroom door hired for the event moved to block his path. "Private event, sir. I need to see your invitation." Judge Thorne didn't break his stride. He looked at the first guard, his gaze so cold and intense, it was like being pinned by a shard of ice. "I am United States District Judge Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "And I am the father of the bride, the real bride. Now get out of my way." The guards, suddenly looking like boys playing dress-up, practically stumbled over each other to open the doors. Inside the ballroom, the officiant was reaching his crescendo. "Do you, Damian Vance, take Isabella Rossi to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Damian's smile was predatory. "I do. And do you, Isabella Rossi, take—" Bang! The great ballroom doors slammed open, echoing like a gunshot in the hushed space. The music faltered and died. Every head turned. There, framed in the doorway, stood Judge Marcus Thorne. He walked down the aisle, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet, but deafening in the sudden absolute silence. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't running. He was a force of nature, calm and inexorable, and he was heading straight for the altar. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Damian's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of his own making. Who was this man? He looked vaguely familiar, a ghost from a distant past, but the sheer force of his presence scrambled Damian's thoughts. He radiated an authority that had nothing to do with money or corporate titles. It was older, deeper, and far more terrifying. Isabella's perfectly painted smile tightened into a venomous line. "Security," she hissed, her voice a sharp crack in the silence. "Remove this man." The two guards who had been at the door took a hesitant step forward, but stopped dead when Judge Thorne turned his head slightly and leveled his gaze at them. It was all it took. They froze, rooted to the spot. Marcus Thorne reached the altar and stopped, not before Damian, but beside him, as if he belonged there. He ignored Isabella completely, his eyes locking onto Damian's. Damian felt himself shrink under that gaze, the carefully constructed edifice of the powerful CEO crumbling to reveal the frightened, greedy man beneath. "The ceremony is over," the judge stated. It wasn't a request. It was a verdict. Marco Rossi. Isabella's father surged to his feet. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "You're ruining my daughter's wedding." Marcus turned his head slowly to face him. "I am Judge Marcus Thorne. And you, Mr. Rossi, might want to sit down and listen very carefully, as what I'm about to say will have significant implications for the future of your company, your daughter, and your potential son-in-law." He let the title hang in the air, dripping with sarcasm. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Judge Thorne, the iron gavel of the Southern District. What was he doing here? Damian finally found his voice, though it was strained. "This is a private matter. Whatever issue you have, we can discuss it later. Now please leave." "Oh, this is no longer a private matter, Mr. Vance." The judge countered his voice, dangerously soft. He produced a folded document from the inside of his jacket. "This is a matter of public record, or it will be in about 5 minutes when my clerk files it electronically." He unfolded the paper. "This is an emergency ex parte injunction. It legally prohibits you from entering into any marital or financial contract until a full hearing can be conducted." Isabella laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "On what grounds?" "This is insane. He's a free man." "Is he?" Judge Thorne's eyes glinted. "The grounds are threefold. First, spousal abandonment under extreme medical duress. You see, while you are standing here amongst the orchids, your actual wife, Elara Vance, is currently in an operating room at Lenox Hill Hospital, undergoing an emergency C-section to deliver your 3 children. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The reporters in the back began scribbling furiously, their phones held up to record. This was no longer a society wedding. It was the scandal of the decade. Damien paled. "That's a lie. She's not due for another 2 weeks. Apparently your triplets didn't consult your social calendar," the judge retorted icily. "Which brings me to the second grounds, dissipation of marital assets. For instance, this rather extravagant party, the ring on your new friend's finger, the signing bonus you wired to a private account for Mr. Rossi this morning. You have been systematically liquidating assets that belong by law to the marital estate you share with Elara, funds that were in part earmarked for the Triplets trust funds." Marco Rossi's face went from purple with rage to ashen white. "The side deal. How could this man know about the private wire transfer? And the third ground, Judge." Thorne continued, his voice dropping each word, a hammer blow, "is fraud." Damien's blood ran cold. "Fraud? That's preposterous. My company is an open book. We'll see about that," the judge said, his eyes boring into Damien's. "But this injunction isn't about your company. It's about you. You see, Mr. Vance, in the state of New York, a marriage is a contract. And you cannot enter into this contract with Ms. Rossi, because you are still very much married to my daughter." The final 2 words landed with the force of a physical explosion. "My daughter." The puzzle pieces slammed into place in Damien's mind with nauseating clarity. Elara's estranged father, the one she never talked about, the federal judge, the man he had dismissed as a civil servant who didn't understand ambition. He had grossly, catastrophically underestimated the man he had wronged. This wasn't a random act of a concerned citizen. This was personal. This was a father's retribution. Isabella stared at Damien, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. His daughter. "You told me she was an orphan, that her family was dead." Damien couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. He had lied, of course. He had scrubbed Elara's history, presenting her as a beautiful but tragic figure, with no connections, no one to cause a fuss. It had made her seem more vulnerable, more disposable. Judge Thorne allowed a thin, cruel smile to touch his lips. He lied. It seems to be a habit of his. But the lie is over now. He turned to address the stunned crowd. "I apologize for the interruption. However, I'm sure you'll all agree that bigamy is generally frowned upon. As for the Vance-Rossi merger, I would advise all shareholders to sell their stock first thing tomorrow morning." He then looked directly at the press cameras in the back of the room, his face a mask of judicial fury. "And let the record show that as of this moment, the U.S. Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the SEC, has opened a formal investigation into the finances of Damien Vance and Vance Corporation. Chaos erupted. Marco Rossi was shouting at his lawyers. Isabella tore the ring from her finger and hurled it at Damien's chest. Guests were scrambling for the exits, whispering into their phones. The reporters surged forward, a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Damien Vance stood alone at the altar, a groom with no bride, a king in a crumbling castle. The sweet scent of orchids now smelled like decay. In the span of 10 minutes, Judge Marcus Thorne had not just stopped a wedding, he had declared war. And Damien knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones that it was a war he was going to lose. The opulent ballroom had transformed into a war room. The Vivaldi was replaced by a cacophony of panicked phone calls and furious whispered arguments. Marco Rossi had cornered Damien against a pillar draped in white satin, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "You're finished, Vance. You hear me? You brought this plague to my family's doorstep. You swore to me she was a nobody, a ghost." Marco jabbed a finger into Damien's chest. "A federal judge's daughter, an SEC investigation. You've made me a laughingstock and a criminal target in one afternoon." Isabella stood nearby, talking to her own lawyer, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She didn't even look at Damien. To her, he was no longer a prize to be won, but a liability to be jettisoned. The future she had envisioned, a life of unchallenged power and social dominance, had evaporated. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and her fury was glacial. Damien felt like he was outside his own body, watching a movie of his life's spectacular implosion. Judge Thorne stood calmly in the center of the storm, speaking quietly with two well-dressed individuals who had entered with him. They had the unmistakable look of federal agents. Damien's lawyer Abernathy finally pushed through the throng, his face slick with sweat. "Damien, we need to go. Now. Don't say a word to anyone." "Go where?" Damien asked, his voice hollow. "My life just detonated. We'll figure that out later. Right now we're in damage control." Abernathy's eyes darted nervously towards the judge. "I can't believe you never told me her father was Marcus Thorne." "The iron gavel. He once sent a billionaire to prison for 20 years for insider trading and barely broke a sweat. We are so far out of our league it isn't funny." Judge Thorne concluded his conversation and walked towards them, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He stopped in front of Damien, his expression unreadable. "I have a car waiting to take me to the hospital to meet my grandchildren." He said the words, a quiet condemnation. "Before I go, I want you to understand the gravity of your situation." He gestured to one of the men he'd been speaking with. "This is Agent Fitzpatrick from the SEC's Enforcement Division. You see, Mr. Vance. About 6 months ago, a rather concerned vice president in your accounting department noticed some irregularities. A pattern of transferring corporate funds through a series of shell companies, ultimately ending up in your personal offshore accounts. This VP, a decent man with a family, couldn't stomach it. So he started making copies. He became a whistleblower." Damien's blood turned to ice. David Peterson, the quiet, mousy VP he'd always thought was a spineless yes-man. "Mr. Peterson was smart," the judge continued. "He didn't know who to trust, but he did know that your wife Alara was my daughter. He reached out to me not as a judge, but as a father he hoped would protect his own. For the last 4 months, Agent Fitzpatrick and his team have been building a case. We know about the funds you siphoned to inflate your company's value ahead of the merger. We know you used marital assets half owned by my daughter as collateral for high-risk loans to finance this sham deal. You didn't just betray your wife, Mr. Vance. You committed wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." Every word was a nail in his coffin. This wasn't just a messy divorce. This was a federal case, the kind that didn't end in settlements but in prison sentences. Why, Damien finally managed to choke out. Why do all this? The public humiliation. A flicker of raw emotion, the first he'd shown, crossed the judge's face. It was the incandescent rage of a father. "Because you left my daughter alone," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, making it all the more menacing. "You left her terrified and in agony, believing she had no one in the world while her body was fighting to give you children you were already planning to discard. You tried to erase her, to render her powerless. I am simply ensuring that you are the one who is erased. That you have nothing. No company, no money, no freedom. You will have nothing to offer your children but a cautionary tale." He looked over at the Rossi family, who were now trying to distance themselves as quickly as possible. "As for your deal, it's dead. The SEC is freezing all assets of Vance Corporation pending the investigation. Your stock will be worthless by morning. The Vance-Rossi merger is officially toxic." With that, Judge Thorne turned his back on the wreckage of Damien's life and walked away. The message was clear. The trial in the court of law was yet to come, but the verdict on Damien Vance, the man, had already been delivered. He was guilty. Abernathy grabbed his arm. "Damien, listen to me. Your only play right now is public perception. You have to go to the hospital. You have to be seen as the concerned father. It's the only card we have left to play." The thought of facing Alara, of seeing the children he had so callously betrayed, filled him with a profound sense of dread. But Abernathy was right. He had to try to salvage something, anything, from the ashes. Nodding numbly, he allowed his lawyer to guide him through the gauntlet of reporters. Their questions like blows: "Mr. Vance, is it true you're a bigamist? What's your comment on the fraud allegations? Did you know your wife was in labor?" He didn't answer. He just got into the car, his designer suit feeling like a shroud. He was being driven to a hospital to see the children whose future he had stolen, all while their grandfather, the man he had scorned, was methodically orchestrating his complete and utter ruin. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway felt a world away from the golden glow of the St. Regis. Here, the air smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, a stark reality check. The sounds were not of string quartets, but of quiet weeping from a nearby room, and the urgent squeaking wheels of a gurney being rushed down the hall. Alara was in the recovery room. The C-section had been grueling, a terrifying ordeal, where the world had narrowed to Dr. Chen's urgent commands and the unnerving silence of a baby who wasn't crying. For one heart-stopping minute after Amelia, the smallest of the three, was born, there had been nothing. Just the frantic work of the neonatal team, and then a tiny, furious wail had sliced through the tension, the most beautiful sound Alara had ever heard. Now they lay in 3 separate, clear-sided bassinets beside her bed. Liam, the firstborn, with a shock of dark hair just like hers. Noah calm and watchful, his eyes already seeming to take in the world. And tiny Amelia, so fragile, yet so fierce, a little fighter who had already won her first battle. They were perfect. They were hers. And as she looked at their 3 sleeping faces, a new strength, cold and clear as steel, settled in her heart. The pain of Damien's betrayal was still there, a raw, gaping wound. But it was overshadowed by a fierce, primal wave of love and protection for these 3 small beings. They were her legacy, not his. Her sister Sarah was beside her, holding her hand. A few minutes later, the door opened and Judge Marcus Thorne walked in. His stern judicial mask was gone. In its place was the face of a father and a grandfather. His eyes filled with a love and regret so profound it made Alara's throat ache. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Tears welled in her eyes. "Dad." He crossed the room in 2 strides and enveloped her in a hug, careful of her incision. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I let my pride keep me away. I should have fought harder for you. You're here now," she sobbed into his shoulder. "That's all that matters. You're here now." He pulled back and looked at the bassinets, his gaze softening. "My God," he murmured, reaching out a hand to gently touch Liam's cheek. "They're beautiful, just like their mother." They stood in a quiet bubble of reunion and new beginnings, a broken family starting to stitch itself back together. It was into this sacred space that Damien Vance, flanked by his lawyer, chose to walk. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Elara, pale and exhausted, but radiating a strength he'd never seen before. Her father, his sworn enemy, standing guard like a sentinel. And the 3 babies, his children. For the first time, the reality of what he had done hit him not as a strategic blunder, but as a profound personal failure. These were not inconvenient details. They were tiny, perfect human beings, his flesh and blood. Abernathy gave him a slight push. "Go on. Be the father." Damien took a hesitant step into the room. Elara's head snapped up. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a frozen calm. Judge Thorne moved to stand directly between Damien and Elara's bed. "You are not welcome here, Mr. Vance," the judge said, his voice low and final. "I have a right to see my children," Damien said, his voice pleading. It was a performance, but a part of him, a small, buried part, actually meant it. A right? Elara's voice, though weak, cut through the air like glass. "You have no rights here. Rights are earned. You were busy earning a new wife." She looked at him, truly, looked at him, and saw not the charming, ambitious man she had fallen in love with, but a stranger. A hollow man, animated only by greed. The love she had felt for him had been burned away, cauterized by the sheer heat of his betrayal. All that was left was ash. "I want to see them, Ellie. Please," he begged, his eyes fixed on the bassinets. Slowly, painfully, Elara pushed herself up. With Sarah's help, she stood her body screaming in protest. She walked the few steps to the bassinets and stood before them, creating a human shield. "Their names are Liam, Noah, and Amelia," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I want you to look at them, Damien. I want you to see their faces, because this is the last time you will ever be this close to them." Damien's face crumpled. "Elara, don't do this. We can work something out. A settlement. A settlement." She repeated the word as if it were poison. "You think you can put a price on this? You think you can buy your way back into their lives? You don't get to do that. You don't get to be the weekend dad who swoops in with expensive gifts to ease his conscience. You don't get to be their father. You abdicated that role today at an altar at the St. Regis." She took a deep breath, the finality of her decision solidifying within her. "You will have no parental rights. I will file for sole custody on the grounds of abandonment and moral endangerment. My father will represent me. You can fight it. You can drag your name and what's left of your reputation through the mud for years, but you will lose, just like you've lost everything else." She turned to her father. "Dad, please get him out of here." Judge Thorne nodded and took a step towards Damien. "You heard my daughter. Get out." Damien looked from Elara's resolute face to the judge's implacable one, and finally at the 3 sleeping babies he would never know. He had traded them for a merger that was now worthless, for a woman who now despised him, for a future that was now a prison cell. He had made the worst deal of his life. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. The sound of the door clicking shut behind him was the sound of a life ending. His life with them. Elara collapsed back onto the bed. Tears of exhaustion, grief, and a strange, liberating relief streaming down her face. She had cut the final tie. It was over. She looked at her father, her sister, and her 3 beautiful children. It was just them now. It was a new family born from the ashes of a great betrayal. And for the first time in a very long time, Elara felt the faint, flickering stirrings of hope. The story exploded across the media landscape like a wildfire. It had everything: wealth, sex, betrayal, a high-stakes corporate merger, and the delicious karmic downfall of a titan. News outlets dubbed it the St. Regis scandal. Paparazzi swarmed the hospital and Damien's penthouse. The headlines were brutal: bigamist billionaire CEO dumps laboring wife for heiress iron, gavels revenge, judge obliterates son-in-law's wedding and empire, Vance Corps in free fall after CEO's fraud revealed. Just as Judge Thorne had predicted when the stock market opened on Monday morning, Vance Corporation's stock didn't just drop, it plummeted off a cliff. The price cratered by over 90% within the first hour of trading. The board of directors, a group of ruthless individuals who valued profit above all else, convened an emergency meeting. Their decision was swift and unanimous. Damien Vance was terminated as CEO effective immediately for gross misconduct and actions detrimental to the company. They issued a public statement condemning his personal and professional behavior, effectively throwing him under the bus to save what little they could of the company. The Rossi family was equally swift in their damage control. Their patriarch, Marco Rossi, held a press conference. He painted his daughter Isabella as a victim, a woman deceived by a pathological liar. The Vance-Rossi merger was declared dead, with the Rossis publicly thanking Judge Thorne for exposing the deep-seated corruption within Vance Corporation before their companies were irrevocably linked. Privately, they hired the most aggressive lawyers in the city to ensure none of the financial or legal shrapnel from Damien's implosion hit them. Isabella, after one tearful, scripted television interview about her shattered heart, disappeared to a private resort in St. Bart's, erasing Damien from her life as easily as deleting a contact from her phone. For Damien, the world shrank to the 4 walls of his lawyer's office. His assets were frozen. His corporate credit cards were canceled. The locks on his penthouse were changed by the building's board. He was served with divorce papers, a restraining order keeping him 500 feet from Elara and the children, and a federal subpoena. The friends who had once clamored for his attention now sent his calls to voicemail. He was a pariah, a social leper. The legal battle was not a battle at all. It was a siege. Judge Thorne, acting as Elara's private counsel, was relentless. He used his encyclopedic knowledge of the law and his network of contacts to systematically dismantle every defense Abernathy tried to mount. Damien's attempts to claim shared custody were laughed out of court. His arguments about marital assets were countered with meticulously documented proof of his fraud. He was forced to watch from afar as Elara's life began anew. He saw pictures of her leaving the hospital, her father holding one baby carrier, her sister another. He saw articles celebrating her strength, framing her as a symbol of resilience. She and the children moved into her father's stately home in Connecticut, a fortress of quiet dignity he could not breach. The federal investigation ground on relentless and methodical. The whistleblower David Peterson provided a roadmap for the SEC detailing every illegal transfer, every cooked book. Damien was buried under a mountain of evidence. Abernathy, seeing the writing on the wall, advised him to take a plea deal. 6 months after that fateful day at the St. Regis, Damien Vance stood before a federal judge, a colleague of Marcus Thorne's, who looked at him with undisguised contempt. He was no longer the sharp, commanding CEO. His expensive suit hung on his thinner frame, his face was gaunt, and his eyes were hollowed out by sleepless nights and the gnawing acid of regret. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud. The judge's sentencing was scathing. You possessed every advantage a person could ask for intelligence, wealth, and a family on the verge of welcoming 3 new lives. You squandered it all on the altar of your own greed. You betrayed not only the trust of your shareholders, but the sacred trust of your wife and your unborn children. Your actions were not just illegal, they were a profound moral failure. The sentence was handed down 10 years in a federal medium-security prison. As U.S. Marshals led him from the courtroom, he caught a glimpse of a news report on a nearby monitor. It was a human interest piece about Elara Vance. She was being interviewed in a sunlit park, her 3 babies now healthy, and giggling 6-month-olds playing on a blanket at her feet. She was talking about her new foundation, one dedicated to providing legal and financial support for women and children abandoned in crisis situations. She looked happy, peaceful, strong. The image of her radiant smile, a smile he had once owned and had so carelessly thrown away, was the last thing he saw before the doors of the courthouse closed behind him, plunging his world into shadow. He had lost his company, his fortune, and his freedom. But in that moment, seeing the beautiful family he could never be a part of, he finally understood the true depth of what he had lost. He hadn't just lost a life, he had lost a soul. 2 years felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The immediate aftermath of the triplets' birth had been a blur of joyful chaos, a whirlwind of round-the-clock feedings, diaper changes, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful reality of being a new mother to 3 infants at once. The media frenzy had been a storm raging just outside their windows. For weeks, paparazzi had camped outside the hospital and then her father's Connecticut estate. But inside, Marcus Thorne had created a fortress of tranquility. He screened every call, handled every press inquiry with a curt, "no comment," and allowed Elara the space to heal both physically and emotionally, surrounded by the demanding, all-consuming love of her newborns. She had shed the Vance surname as one might shed a heavy, soiled coat, reclaiming her own name, Elara Thorne. It felt like coming home. The chasm that had existed between her and her father vanished, filled in by the shared work of caring for the babies. She watched the formidable iron gavel melt into Grandpa, a man who could command a courtroom with a glare, but was utterly powerless against the gummy smile of his granddaughter Amelia. He learned to distinguish the cries of Liam, the hungry one, from Noah, the one who just needed a cuddle. The quiet, stately home of a retired judge was transformed, filled with the clutter of baby gear, the constant hum of a bottle warmer, and the sound of a grandfather's deep voice, reading nursery rhymes. As the months turned into years, the triplets' personalities blossomed 3 distinct flowers from a single root. Liam was a force of nature, a tiny climber and explorer with an unquenchable curiosity and a complete disregard for gravity. He was a creature of scraped knees and triumphant giggles, his motto a resounding, "Me do it!" Marcus shadowed him with the vigilant eye of a Secret Service agent, his heart leaping into his throat at least once a day. Noah was the old soul, the watcher. He had his grandfather's pensive eyes and his mother's gentle heart. He would sit for hours, utterly content with a book of pictures, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was the first to notice when his mother looked tired, patting her cheek with his small hand, in a gesture of profound, unspoken comfort. He was her anchor, her quiet shadow. And Amelia was without question the one in charge. She was a whirlwind of dark curls and sparkling eyes, a tiny diplomat who had both her brothers and her grandfather wrapped around her little finger. She ruled their small kingdom with a combination of irresistible charm and unwavering determination. She was the first to talk, the first to sing, and the first to decide what game they would all play next. It was during a sleepless night, rocking a feverish Noah back and forth, that the idea for her future took shape. Scrolling through her phone, she'd stumbled upon an online forum for single mothers. She read story after story of women in far more desperate situations than her own women fleeing abuse with nothing but the clothes on their backs, women abandoned without financial resources, drowning in legal fees and despair. Her own story, as traumatic as it had been, was cushioned by her father's power and resources. These women had no one. The injustice of it burned in her. Damien had tried to render her powerless, but she had a voice, a name, and a platform. She would use it for them. Thus, the Thorn Legacy Project was born. It began in her father's study with late-night legal consultations, and Alara dusting off her old architecture degree. Her passion was reignited, but with a powerful new purpose. She didn't want to design sterile glass towers for corporations anymore. She wanted to build sanctuaries. Her first project was ambitious, a state-of-the-art housing complex for families in crisis. She obsessed over the details, designing apartments with soundproofed walls, communal kitchens where mothers could support each other, and an on-site trauma-informed daycare. She designed a central courtyard garden, a secure, beautiful place where children could simply play and be children. She poured every ounce of her pain, her anger, and her resilience into those blueprints. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ilara was on the floor of the living room building an elaborate block tower with her children. Liam was the demolition expert, Noah the meticulous planner, and Amelia the project supervisor. The scene was one of perfect, chaotic, domestic bliss. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a news alert forwarded by Sarah. The headline read, "Former CEO Damien Vance granted early release on parole after serving 2 years of 10-year sentence for good behavior." Below it was a photograph. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man with graying hair, wearing an ill-fitting state-issued suit, walking out of the prison gates. He was blinking against the sunlight, looking lost and insignificant. The swaggering, confident predator she had married was gone. In his place was a ghost. A cold tremor, a phantom limb of old fear went through her. For a moment she was back in that hospital room alone and screaming. Then Liam, with a wild cry of delight, sent the block tower crashing down. Amelia squealed. Noah laughed, and the present, vibrant and loud and full of life, came rushing back in. She looked at the man in the photo again. He was a stranger, a relic from a buried life. The power he once held over her was gone, turned to ash. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, she found her father in his study reading a legal brief. She showed him the article. He read it, his expression hardening. "I can make a call," he said, his voice low. "His parole officer will be under no illusions about the terms. The restraining order is still in full effect. He won't come within 1,000 yards of you or the children." Ilara placed her hand on his. "I know." but you don't have to. I'm not afraid of him anymore, Dad. She saw the relief and pride in his eyes. It was true. The man in that picture held no power. He was just a sad, broken man who had made all the wrong choices. Her life was here in this house with her family. Her future was on her drafting table in the homes she was building for others. The next weekend, she was at a park, pushing her children on the swings. It was a perfect day, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Liam was shouting, "Higher, Mommy, higher," trying to kick the sky. Noah was swinging gently, a peaceful smile on his face, while Amelia sang a slightly off-key song to herself. Marcus came and stood beside her, watching his grandchildren. "I was thinking about the word legacy today," he said, his voice reflective. Damien wanted to build a legacy of power, an empire of steel and glass. Look what happened. It was built on a rotten foundation. It collapsed. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a profound admiration. "You, Ellie, you went through hell. And you came back and chose to build something that lasts. You build homes, you build safety, you build hope. That is a legacy. This," he said, gesturing to the laughing children, to her, to the life they had all built together, "this is an empire of the heart. And it will never fall." Elara looked at her 3 beautiful children, their faces alight with pure joy. She thought of the families who would soon be moving into her first completed project, finding safety and a new beginning. Damien's name would be a footnote in business textbooks about corporate scandal. Her name, the name she shared with her father and her children, would be etched into the cornerstones of buildings where lives were being rebuilt. She smiled a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes and filled her soul. She gave Liam's swing another powerful push, sending him soaring up into the endless, brilliant sky. And so Elara's story comes to a close. It began in the depths of unimaginable betrayal, with screams of pain in a lonely hospital room. But it didn't end there. It became a story not of a victim, but of a survivor. A woman who, with the help of a father's fierce love, found the strength to not only reclaim her life, but to build an entirely new one dedicated to helping others rise from their own ashes. Damien Vance chased a legacy of power and ended up with nothing. Elara Thorne built a legacy of love and light, proving that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. What did you think of Elara's incredible journey to justice and peace? What would you have done in her situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and retribution moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of triumph over trial. Thank you for listening.